The road has a way of testing us when we least expect it. And sometimes the quiet hum of tires against the asphalt can turn into the soundtrack of your worst fears. Imagine headlights appearing in your rearview mirror that refuse to disappear no matter how fast you drive, or pulling into a gas station that doesn't seem to exist once you step away. Picture taking a wrong turn and ending up somewhere that feels like a place you were never meant to find, where every sign and every shadow seems designed to trap you. These are the kinds of moments that start out ordinary. The moments any traveler could stumble into, but they twist suddenly into something unforgettable, making you wish you'd never set out on that trip at all. Because when the sun dips below the horizon and the road stretches into endless darkness, you're forced to ask yourself, what would you do if it happened to you? I've spent countless nights on the road, traveling stretches of cracked highways and endless desert landscapes. But there's one night I can't shake from my memory, no matter how many years pass. Even now, the mention of driving at night, with nothing but distant stars and my headlights as a guide, fills me with a tension I carry like a scar. What happened out there still replays in my head, and though I've tried to explain it away, some things won't allow themselves to be explained. It was the summer of 2013, Arizona desert, the kind of air that hangs heavy long after the sun has gone down. I was making the drive from Flagstaff down toward Phoenix, a route I had driven more than a dozen times before. The desert isn't like city driving. Once you're out there, you're truly out there. Miles stretch between gas stations, motels, or any sign of human life. That night, the sky was strangely clear, moonlight washing the sand and rock in that silver kind of glow that makes the desert feel almost alive. I remember having the windows cracked, feeling warm air rush around me, the kind of thick silence you only hear when you cut the radio just to soak in the night. Somewhere past midnight, somewhere between those long, straight stretches of highway that lull you into autopilot, I saw him. A figure standing on the shoulder of the road, thumb lifted half-heartedly in the glow of my headlights. At first, I figured I was seeing things. Mirages are common out there, after all. But as my beams swept over his frame, there was no mistaking it. He was tall, lean, wearing a plaid shirt, jeans, and what looked like old dusty boots. His hair was messy, shadow curling around his jawline, and there was something about his posture, slouched, almost defeated, that made me slow down before I had time to think better of it. I've always been cautious about strangers on the side of the highway. You grow up hearing the warnings, people get robbed, worse things happen, and sometimes the ones who look vulnerable are bait for something darker hiding nearby. Even with all that in my head, there was something about the man's stillness, that lonely silhouette against desert sand that pressed on my guilt. It was the middle of the night in one of the harshest places in the country. If I left him there, chances are he wouldn't make it far. So I pulled over. The gravel crunched under my tires as I eased onto the shoulder. He didn't step back. He didn't wave. He just stood there, gazing directly at me, hands loose at his sides. When I reached over to unlock the passenger side, he walked with slow, deliberate footsteps before sliding into the seat. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Cigarette smoke clung to him, stale like the scent that lingers in old jacket fabric. He nodded once, muttered something under his breath that sounded like thanks, before settling against the seat and facing forward. That was it. No question of where I was headed, no attempt at small talk. I gripped the wheel, a drip of unease tightening inside my gut. Normally, even the most reserved hitchhikers, at least the ones I've met, will mention where they're going, who they are, some scrap of context to make themselves real. But he just sat there, angled slightly away, the way someone does when they're pretending to be asleep but are fully aware of everything around them. The glow of the dashboard lit half of his face, and in that faint green hue, his eyes seemed fixed on some far-off point in the road I couldn't see. I cleared my throat as casually as I could. "You heading south?" No response. Not a nod. Nothing. I tried again, a little louder. "Phoenix?" Slowly, with lagging movement, he turned his head toward me. Just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his expression before he looked forward again. His lips never moved, but I thought I heard a voice, raspy, faint, whispering, "Keep driving." A chill crept down the length of my spine. Keep driving. My fingers clenched the steering wheel tighter, an itch in my brain flickering with alarm. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe he was half asleep. Maybe the desert nights were playing tricks. But even telling myself this, I couldn't shake the unease. Miles ticked by. The desert nothingness stretched endlessly. I tried to glance at him discreetly from the corner of my eye. But each time, something inside told me not to look too long. He sat perfectly still, his breathing barely noticeable, body stiff like someone carved from wax. I wanted desperately to break the silence, to ask who he was, why he was there, anything that might make him more human. But the longer I stayed quiet, the heavier the air grew between us, charged with a presence that pushed into every corner of that car. At some point, I shifted my attention back to the road longer than usual. I don't remember if it was 20 seconds, maybe 30. Long enough that when I finally glanced back at the passenger seat, it was empty. He was gone. Not a door opening. Not the sound of boots scuffing gravel. Nothing. Just gone. The seatbelt was still buckled, loose against the empty cushion. And the smell, that cigarette smoke, still lingered heavier than before, as though he had only just exhaled moments earlier. My body locked into complete stillness, a buzzing panic swelling under my skin. I scanned the side mirrors, the empty desert passing. No figure stumbling back down the road. No shape in the ditch. Nothing that explained how someone could vanish without sound or motion from a moving car at highway speed. I don't remember much of the next miles except driving faster, desperate to reach civilization. The silence in that car wasn't absence. It was pressure, pressing down against me like the world itself was holding its breath. Every time I dared to check the rearview mirror, I swore I caught the faintest outline of someone there, in the back seat. Just faint enough to pass as a trick of light, if not for how my stomach twisted each time I looked. By the time I reached the first lit station off the interstate, my knuckles ached from how tightly I'd been holding the wheel. I pulled in, engine trembling, breath sharp and uneven. I swung my door open, half expecting to see someone crawl out from behind the seat. But the car was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Nothing but that lingering smoke my clothes carried long after. I thought about telling someone, maybe the gas station clerk, about the hitchhiker. But what would I even say? That a man who never spoke, smelled of cigarettes, and appeared in the middle of nowhere simply vanished from my moving car? They'd think I was drunk, high, hallucinating. Maybe I wanted that to be true. Yet, the detail I can't ignore is this: that seatbelt. I keep seeing it in my head. The buckle, still tied across an empty seat, swaying back slightly with the vibration of the car. As though moments before, something had been there, holding it in tension. Seatbelts don't just fasten themselves. For weeks, I avoided night driving, especially in the desert. Months later, I made that same trip again in daylight, the road tight in my chest. Every mile of that stretch, I kept expecting to see him again. Standing on the shoulder with the same slouched posture, thumb out, head tilted just enough to suggest he already knew I'd stop. I've heard old stories since. Rumors of hitchhikers disappearing, of ghostly figures 1 second present, the next gone. But I tell myself it wasn't that. I tell myself it was exhaustion, desert hallucinations, whatever my mind conjured to make the void less lonely. Yet then the smell creeps back into memory, and the echo of that whisper stirs. Keep driving. I did. God, I did. But the road has never felt the same since. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, watching the rearview flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow seems to lean forward from the back seat, just for a second, just long enough for my blood to freeze, long enough to remind me that he never really left. I never believed in paranoia until that night on the interstate. I used to think if something didn't scare you outright, then your mind was just playing tricks, running wild with shadows in the dark. But after what happened on that long stretch of highway, I've lived with a gnawing certainty that sometimes it's not the mind, it's reality, twisted and warped in ways you can't escape. It was a solo trip from Oklahoma to Kansas, a drive I made often for work. Nothing special about it, just hours of wide-open roads, the steady drone of tires on asphalt, and the occasional chance to stop and stretch in one of those highway rest stops. I never cared much for the stops. I treated them like brief pit stops, bathrooms and vending machines, then back to the wheel. But that night was different. I stopped for the first break at a rest area just past midnight, not busy. Hardly anyone else around except a few trucks parked off to one side. I stepped out, cracked the door, and headed inside. As I was coming back, I saw him, standing just at the edge of the parking lot. A man alone, his figure caught in the pools of light from a flickering lamppost. He didn't look dangerous, not at first. Just a guy in a worn jacket, jeans, boots, like someone who's been on the road too long. But there was something off. His eyes caught mine and held too long, the way someone stares when they aren't really looking. I shouldn't have paid attention. But I did. Something chilled me as I climbed back into the car and pulled out onto the highway. An hour later, needing another break, I stopped again. This rest stop was quieter, smaller, barely a car in sight. I was still thinking about that man from the first stop, half wondering if I'd imagined him. But as I stepped out, my heart nearly stopped. There he was again, same jacket, same boots, standing just inside the parking lot under a different lamppost, his posture just as casual but with the same eyes that pierced through the darkness. My mouth went dry. I didn't speak, didn't ask, just stared because I had to be sure it was him. I didn't want to show fear, but I won't lie. My pulse went haywire. I climbed back in and drove off, trying to shake the feeling I was being watched, followed maybe. But I was still miles from anywhere. No one else on the highway, no cops, no friendly faces. Just him. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe he'd just randomly been at both these stops. But then, 3 hours later, as I pulled into my third rest stop, a tiny place with one flickering streetlight and the smell of dust and bleach, I saw him again. He wasn't walking this time. He was standing still, in the very middle of the lot, looking right at me. No expression, No movement, just standing there like a rock, waiting. I locked the car doors as I slid in and peered through the windshield, trying to convince myself he would simply turn and leave. But instead, he started walking toward my car. Not fast, not sprinting, just steady, deliberate. Each step slow and loud against the gravel, crunching like a countdown in my ears. I could feel every muscle tense as my heart pounded against my ribs. I sat frozen for what felt like minutes before realizing he wasn't stopping. Not at the driver's side window, not at the passenger door. He was moving straight toward the rear of the car. I fumbled to start the engine, my hands shaking like I'd downed an entire pot of coffee. The headlights flickered to life, and as if that was the cue, he vanished. Just like that, disappeared into the night. There was no sound, no retreating footsteps, no rustling bushes, nothing, just gone. I took off down the highway, eyes darting to the mirrors, chest tight. For the rest of the drive, I caught glimpses. Shadows at the periphery of vision, a silhouette appearing in the distant horizon, the faint outline of a figure standing by the roadside, always watching. I pulled over twice, checked the car, searched the back seat, door locks. Nothing. No sign he'd ever been inside or anywhere near. But my skin crawled with a cold certainty that I was being hunted. I made it to my destination, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw movement just outside the window. Heard footsteps crunching gravel in the dream world between waking and sleep. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Wherever I went, something was waiting, just out of sight, but always close enough to know it was there. I tried to tell friends when I got back home, but they laughed it off. Just stress from the trip, paranoia from being alone so long. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was all in my head. But then, when I checked my phone days later, there was a message I didn't recognize. No text, no alert, just an old voicemail, saved automatically from a restricted number. I played it. What I heard chilled me more than any shadow or figure, more than any lonely rest stop. A voice, low and gravelly, whispering, "You can't run from me. I'm where the road ends." I called the number back. No connection. The line was dead. I haven't traveled that highway since. And every time I'm at a rest stop, no matter where, my eyes search the distance, half expecting to see that same jacket. Those cold eyes watching, following. Some nights, I still hear footsteps outside my window, slow and crunching like gravel, and I can't help but wonder, how long before he catches me? It started like any other road trip, just me and my wife, driving back home from visiting family. We decided to take a new route that cut through some of the less traveled back roads of West Virginia, hoping for a quiet drive without the heavy traffic of the interstate. The GPS promised a shortcut, a way through twisting hills and shaded forests, and for a while it was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the trees, casting long shadows across the road as we wound uphill, the thick canopy above filtering the fading light into a greenish haze. The air grew cooler, the smell of damp earth and pine filling the car. We chatted lightly, nothing unusual, until the GPS took an unexpected turn, off the paved highway and onto a narrow dirt road that barely looked like a road at all. I hesitated. The way was so overgrown it felt like we were heading into somewhere forgotten. My wife wasn't thrilled either, but I trusted the technology. And besides, it promised this was the way to an old highway that would take us out near a bigger town farther ahead. At first, the road was bumpy but manageable, The car crept forward, tires crunching on gravel, branches scraping the sides. The houses became fewer and fewer. Empty plots, broken-down barns, abandoned cars rusting half-buried in the dirt. The feeling of isolation began to settle in. Then, without warning, we reached a small cluster of buildings, a town that didn't show up on any of our maps. It was like stepping back in time. The buildings were faded, paint peeling, windows cracked and boarded up haphazardly. A single rusted street sign hung crooked, as if waiting to fall. Its letters faded beyond recognition. There were no cars parked, no signs of life, except for the faint glow of lights from a few windows, dim, almost flickering. We both froze. It was the kind of weird that can make your skin crawl, in a place so dead and quiet. Why were those lights on? I rolled down the window, listening for sounds. Nothing but the wind moving through dead leaves. I reached for my phone to check for signal. It was dead, no bars at all. No connection to the world outside. We decided to keep moving, hoping to find a gas station or even a main road sooner rather than later. But as we drove past the outskirts of the town, the road became a maze. Every turn seemed to circle us back to the same street, the same cluster of empty houses with those flickering lights. I checked the GPS again, only to find that it was going haywire. Routes disappearing and reappearing randomly. Roads that blinked out and came back as if the map itself was broken. The strangest part was how silent everything was. No birds, no insects, no dogs barking or cars passing. The world felt paused, frozen in a moment that didn't want to move forward. Darkness fell fast here. A thick blackness that made the shadows swarm and pulse. We tried to stay calm, but panic crept in. My wife begged me to turn around, to go back the way we came, but the roads we tried also looped endlessly. It was like the town was designed to trap us, a spiderweb of silence and light, drawing us deeper in with no way out. At one point, we stopped beside a house that looked like it had been lived in recently. A single porch light still glowing warmly. I thought maybe someone could help us. But when we knocked on the door, there was no answer. Only silence. An oppressive, suffocating silence. I noticed the flickering lights weren't coming from inside the houses as we expected, but from old candles perched unsteadily in the windows. They gave the place an eerie glow, shadows twisting like living things across peeling wallpaper and broken glass. As the minutes dragged into an hour, exhaustion took over. We debated leaving the car, just walking until we found a way out. But the woods around seemed endless, dark and thick with unfamiliar sounds that made us freeze in place. In a moment of sheer desperation, I slammed the car into reverse and floored the accelerator, hoping to break the loop. The car rattled and groaned, tires skidding on gravel, and for a split second, the road straightened. For a heartbeat, I thought we were free, until we slammed into something unseen and stopped dead cold. I jumped out, heart hammering. There was nothing but an invisible barrier, an edge of the town, some boundary that was more a force than a fence. We were trapped. My wife cried softly, and I realized that our phones had snapped off completely, dead on all fronts, no lights, no sounds, no signals. The eerie light from the candles grew stronger in the windows, and for the first time, I noticed shapes moving behind them, dark figures, unmoving but watching. We stared back, frozen. The ground beneath our feet seemed to pulse, and the silence turned into a low hum, a whisper barely audible, but everywhere at once. The hum filled my head until I felt like I could hear every breath, every movement, like the town itself was alive and breathing, watching us. We spent what felt like hours driving this endless loop, the lights growing dimmer and brighter, shadows stretching across the car's windows like fingers trying to touch us. The air thickened and grew cold, and I caught the faintest scent of something rotten, like decay mixed with burnt wood. I don't remember how long we were there exactly. Time passed strangely in that place. Eventually, we took another wrong turn, or maybe it was the right one, and the endless town finally began to break apart, the fog rolling back and the trees thinning as dawn approached. Emerging from that nightmare felt like waking from a bad dream. The GPS found satellites again, the radio crackled to life, and the familiar sights of the highway welcomed us back with open arms. We didn't speak much afterward, but the weight of what we'd seen hung heavy. I still can't explain it. That town, it wasn't on any map, and when friends tried to search for it, they found nothing. I keep checking over and over, but it's as if it never existed but for that cursed night. Sometimes, when I'm driving late and the roads get quiet, I see those flickering candlelights in the corner of my vision, and I feel that hum grow faintly in the air around me. It reminds me that some places are better left unseen, some roads better left untraveled, and some wrong turns taken only once. I wasn't much for talking on the radio before this happened. For me, the CB was little more than background noise or a way to catch traffic updates on long hauls. I preferred the solitude of my ride, the rhythm of the highway beneath the wheels, the endless horizon pushing away all distractions. But that night changed everything. I was hauling a load from Texas to New Mexico, a shift scheduled to keep me rolling through the night when the roads are emptier and the air cooler. The desert skies stretched wide above, the stars dotting the black canvas as my rig rumbled steadily along the two-lane highway. No other cars passed for miles, just me and the steady hum of the engine. About halfway through the journey, I switched on the CB radio, figuring I'd at least listen for any chatter or warnings about road conditions ahead. For the first hour, no one spoke. Then, a crackle came through, faint but unmistakable. A deep, gruff voice that cut through the static with a warning. Bad things ahead. Slow down and keep your eyes open. I almost laughed at the mysterious voice, thinking it was just a prank or some trucker trying to freak out new drivers. But something in the timbre, the weight of the warning, chilled me more than I expected. I responded with a simple, "Thanks, brother. What's going on up ahead?" But the radio went silent. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was imagining things, until about 30 minutes later when the voice returned. Not with words, but a low, urgent growl that made the hair on my neck stand up. I slowed down, road stretching thin and empty, when I spotted something up ahead. There was a crash site, twisted metal and shattered glass scattered across the pavement like a bad dream frozen in time. A couple of cars had collided, debris blocking one lane entirely. No emergency vehicles yet. No people in sight. It was as if the accident had just happened, moments before I arrived. I radioed through the CB to warn anyone coming, but the line was dead silent except for that growling background. I drove slowly past the wreckage, eyes scanning for survivors or signs of movement. I could feel a cold weight settling in my chest, the unease gnawing away like something waiting just outside my headlights. As miles passed, the night felt thicker. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer, sharper, almost desperate. "Turn back. Don't go past the ridge." "Who's this?" I asked. my voice tight. Why? More static, then silence again. Against my better judgment, I kept going. I wanted to reach my drop-off, to finish the haul. But the warnings settled over me like a shroud. Then, the radio cut out completely. No static, no signals, just dead air. I fiddled with the dials, cursed my equipment, but nothing. The silence was heavier than any noise I'd ever heard, like the radio was holding its breath. I flicked on the CB mic one last time. If you hear this, please just tell me what's coming. No answer. The road began to rise, climbing toward a ridge that cut across the highway, the horizon narrowing. My headlights pierced the darkness, and then I saw it. Figures moving through the shadows alongside the road, flickering in and out like ghosts. My heart thumped loud enough to drown the sound of the engine. I slowed to a crawl, eyes wide as one figure stepped onto the road. Not a person, but something thin, elongated, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. The eyes glowed faintly red. Whatever it wasn't human. I slammed the accelerator, trying not to look in the mirrors or rear view. But I could feel the presence crawling close behind me. Then the truck started to shake violently, like forces tugging at it from every corner. I cursed and gritted my teeth, hands gripping the wheel like my life depended on it, because it did. Suddenly, the radio crackled once more, and the voice returned. Quieter now and frayed. This is my last warning. Turn back before it's too late. I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear it again. The road straightened out. The figures disappeared. The air felt lighter, but my skin was slick with sweat. I didn't stop, didn't dare slow down until the city lights blinked into view hours later. I checked my radio again. The CB was dead, nothing but static. Weeks later, I tried to track the voice, the source of those warnings. No truckers reported talking to me. No distress calls matching those words. Some said I must have heard a prank or my mind messing with me in isolation. But when I listened to my voicemail, there's a static-laden message with a harsh whisper. Keep away from the ridge. I never crossed that road again. I rerouted every haul, avoided those empty stretches, and kept my CB off. And sometimes, when late at night the radio crackles with nothing but static, I swear I hear that voice, warning me still, watching, waiting, like the ridge is still out there, filled with things not meant for human eyes. I've always been a pretty cautious driver, especially when I'm alone at night on the road. Over the years, I learned the hard way that some instincts are worth listening to, no matter how much you want to be the kind of person who stops and helps. But one night, deep on a rural highway, my caution was tested in a way I'll never forget, and it haunts me still. It was a late September evening, the kind of night where the air turns crisp and the sun dips low and fast, leaving you wrapped in cold dark sooner than you expect. I was driving home from a long business trip, making my way through one of those lonely stretches in Northern California that cuts through dense woods and winding hills. The only light was from my headlights and the pale moonlight slipping through the trees. The highway was mostly empty, the occasional car flashing past in the distance, but all quiet otherwise. My mind drifted into that familiar state where driving becomes almost like dreaming. The road becomes a line, the engine hum becomes a lullaby, and your thoughts float somewhere far away. Then, just as I crested a hill, I spotted flashes of red, hazard lights blinking weakly on the shoulder ahead. My first thought was a car broken down, someone stuck in the kind of place where help is far away, and night makes every moment colder and lonelier. I braked gently and pulled over behind the car. When I switched off my engine, The sudden quiet struck me. All the normal nighttime sounds faded away, like someone had flipped a switch. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I stepped out onto the gravel shoulder and headed toward the car. It was an older sedan, beaten up and dusty, with the driver's side door hanging open slightly. The hazard lights blinked intermittently, but the engine was cold. The tires on the driver's side were flat, shredded beyond repair. I called out quietly, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. Inside the car, the front seat was a mess. Clothes draped over the passenger seat, a coffee cup spilled across the floor, papers scattered around as if the driver had left abruptly. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was very wrong. I went back to my car to grab my phone and call roadside assistance. That's when the trouble started. No signal, not a single bar. The screen lit up with that frustratingly empty message. No service. I cursed quietly, looking around nervously. The trees whispered in a faint breeze, but the silence on the roadside weighed heavy. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not from the highway or the distant woods, but somewhere close, just off the edge of the road. Crunching gravel, slow and deliberate. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. Sweeping the darkness. Nothing but shadows moving restlessly. My skin prickled, heart thumping hard. I whispered, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response. I strained to listen, and then saw movement, barely a silhouette, darting behind a bend in the trees. I stepped forward cautiously. My senses screamed at me to get back in my car, but the phantom figure, the vague outline of a person, was enough to push me ahead. "What's going on?" I muttered to myself. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a man appeared. Thin, disheveled, dirty jacket pulled tight around his frame. His face was hidden in shadow, but I caught the faintest glimpse of sunken eyes and pale skin. I held out my hand gently. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" He didn't answer. He didn't move closer, but just stood there like he was waiting for something. The night grew colder. My breath puffed out in short clouds as the silence pressed in. "Can I call someone for you? Or a tow truck?" I asked, hoping to coax some response. No reply. Unease churned in my belly. I stepped back toward my car, eyes flicking to the dark woods beyond the man. Then I smelled it. Cigarette smoke. It was faint but unmistakable, drifting low, mixing with the cold night air and the scent of wet earth. I blinked, and the man was gone. Disappeared like a shadow slipping through fingers. I searched frantically, behind trees, bushes, down the shoulder, nothing. No sign he'd ever been there except the ghost of smoke lingering in the crisp air. I bolted back to my car, locking the doors behind me. My hands shook on the ignition. The engine roared to life, but I didn't dare look in the mirrors. I just peeled away from that spot as fast as I could. For the next hour, I drove in silence, nervously glancing around like something was lurking just behind me. Twice, I thought I saw a figure standing by the roadside, a dark form watching me with unreadable eyes. But every time I looked directly, it vanished. When I reached the next town, my nerves finally settled. I called a friend and told him everything. The empty car, the man who vanished, the smell of smoke that shouldn't have been there. He laughed and said it sounded like I was overtired, imagining things. But I knew the truth. A few weeks later, out of morbid curiosity, I went back to the stretch of highway, but during the day. I wanted to see if the car was really there or if it had just been a trick of the night. There was no car, no signs of recent damage or repair, just a perfect stretch of asphalt and gravel that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in ages. I checked with local authorities. No reports of abandoned vehicles or accidents matching my description. No missing persons in that area that fit the kind of man I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. That night on the shoulder changed me. I stopped trusting the lonely roads at night, stopped trusting the silence that could hide anything. Sometimes, even now, when I'm driving alone late and feel that cold shiver sliding down my spine, I remember the smell of that cigarette smoke. Some nights, I can swear I hear footsteps just outside my window, slow and crunching on gravel. I never stopped wondering who he was. The man who vanished, the stranger left behind an empty car, a ghost stranded on the shoulder, who seemed both desperate and untouchable. And I still don't know why I stopped that night. But I'm grateful I did, even if I wish I hadn't. Because some things on the road don't want to be found, and some people are better left alone. I don't know what it was about that night, but something about it has stuck with me in a way no other travel memory ever has. It was one of those trips where everything starts out ordinary, routine even. But the deeper you go, the more you realize you've wandered into something that can't be explained by reason or daylight. I was on a cross-country drive, heading home after a long business meeting in the Midwest. It was late October, and the creeping chill of autumn was wrapped tight around the empty roads outside some nameless town in rural Nevada. I was tired, craving sleep more than anything. And the next motel on my GPS was my only hope for rest before another long day's drive. The highway had been dull that evening. Stretches of cracked asphalt flanked by endless desert. The kind of loneliness that wraps you inside a bubble of silent thoughts and fading headlights. The GPS showed a small cluster of buildings ahead, a motel that promised a bed for the night and nothing more. I took the next exit and followed the signs. At first, it felt reassuring. Neon lights flickering away in the distance, a welcoming glow spilling across the desert darkness. But as I drew closer, the signs began to look odd. The glowing letters buzzed and skipped, some flickering out entirely and then bursting back to neon life in uneven flashes. The motel itself looked old. Real old, like a place forgotten between decades, a relic from a time when people drove slower and destinations were distant. The entire building was sagging under the weight of time, paint peeling, a few cracked windows reflecting the gloom. But lights burned in every window, and shadows moved inside. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed there were no other cars parked. Not a soul was outside. No guests, no staff. The air was still, the kind that presses in and holds its breath. I keyed the doorbell at the front desk, the chime echoing into a strange emptiness. The door swung open soundlessly, creaking with a protest that felt like a warning. The lobby was dim, lit only by flickering bulbs swaying slightly on bare wires. The air smelled of stale smoke and cleaning fluids, but there was an underlying scent of dust and something rancid I couldn't place. A man sat behind the front desk, a middle-aged fellow with thinning hair and tired eyes. But when he looked up at me, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He welcomed me with a voice that was too soft, too hollow, and handed me a room key that felt cold in my hand. "Room 7, he said. "Second floor." I took the key and excused myself quickly. The stairs groaned as I ascended, shadows stretching across the peeling wallpaper. The hallway was quiet, except for the soft hum of the old building settling in the cold night air. I unlocked room 7 and stepped inside. Relief flooding me at the sight of a bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the cracked parking lot. But something was off. The air inside felt heavy, almost suffocating, like the room was holding its breath too. And then there was the light switch. Flick. Nothing. Flick again. The bulb sputtered to life and then back out. Faint whispers riding on the darkness. I chalked it up to the age of the building. I slept fitfully, plagued by restless dreams where shadows moved just beyond my vision, whispers curling through the thin walls like smoke. In my dreams, I saw the man from the desk, his eyes dark pits, watching me from the corner of the room. The next morning, I woke early to find the room freezing cold. I wrapped myself in the thin blanket and opened the curtains. Except there was no parking lot. No cracked asphalt, no neon glow. Instead, the window showed only a blank white wall. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Still a blank wall. Confused, I stepped toward the door. The hallway outside was gone too, replaced by a dim corridor that stretched endlessly, walls narrowing until they pressed close around me, confining, suffocating. I spun around, desperate to find the stairs, the exit. But it was like the building had reshaped itself overnight, twisting into a labyrinth I couldn't escape. I pounded on doors along the hallway, but none opened. The walls seemed to pulse, the peeling wallpaper shifting as if alive. Every now and then, I caught glimpses through cracks, rooms filled with shadows, that same rancid smell filling the air. Desperate, I shouted for help, but my voice simply echoed back, swallowed and distorted like a ghost trapped inside the walls. I returned to my room, but the bed was gone. Only the cold floor beneath me, hard and unyielding. I sank to my knees, panic rising in a tide inside my chest. What was this place? I pinched myself. Yes, I was awake. Fighting the rising fear, I tried the key again, room 7. But the door refused to budge. A low humming filled the air, growing louder, suffocating me with sound. I backed away, heart pounding, ears ringing. In that moment, through the thick, pulsing darkness, I saw figures by the far end of the hall. Shapes moving slowly, as if wrapped in tattered cloth, their faces blurred, unrecognizable. They seemed to watch me, waiting. I felt myself freezing, paralyzed with terror. The humming shifted to whispers, calling my name, soft and urgent, drawing me forward and warning me to stay back all at once. I didn't wait to understand. I bolted down the hallway, blindly running, searching for any exit, any door that might lead me out. The figures glided closer, their ragged movements blending with the flickering light. I stumbled, fell, scrambled to my feet, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break free. Finally, a door appeared, battered and worn, light spilling from the cracks. I yanked it open and stumbled through, and for the first time in hours, I felt air on my face. The sun was shining, hot and bright. I was back in my car, parked by the highway. The motel, the town, everything was gone. Nothing but desert stretching endlessly in every direction. I sat there, doors locked, engine running, heart still racing. My hands shook so badly, I could barely grip the wheel. That place existed, or at least I know I walked through it. But no one else could find it. When I tried to tell others, I was met with confusion or disbelief. Some thought I simply dreamt it, lost my mind after too many late nights on the road. Sometimes, I wonder if the motel was a trap. Some place caught between worlds, designed to ensnare travelers who grew tired, weak, or lost. I think about that man at the desk, his hollow eyes, the soft voice that welcomed me, but never offered kindness. And when I close my eyes at night, I still hear the whispers, feel the cold touch of those shadows brushing past me in the dark hallways. I've never stopped driving after dark since. Because some nights, when the desert is quiet and the stars don't quite align, I swear I can still find that motel off the highway, waiting, watching, ready to pull me back inside forever. I've always been the kind of person who respects quiet. Maybe too much. Some nights, I find comfort in the silence while driving alone down empty country roads where the only sound is the hum of the tires and the wind whispering through the trees. But some silences are not peaceful. They're heavy, ominous, and laced with something that crawls under your skin like cold fingers. After the night I spent driving under an overpass just outside a tiny town in Ohio, the kind of silence I thought I knew changed forever. It was a late spring night, the kind when the air feels thick and warm, but the darkness presses in like a living thing. I was driving back from a friend's house, alone for the first time in hours, eager to get back home and out of the quiet that had settled over me like a shroud. The road was empty, the highway winding through wooded hills that blotted out the stars above. There was a spot on this stretch of road, the only real landmark for miles, the old overpass. It spanned the highway like a gateway, a weathered slab of concrete with rusty railings and streaked walls splattered with long-forgotten graffiti. I knew the locals avoided it at night, or at least crossed it quickly. I'd heard rumors, whispers about strange sounds and vanished travelers, but I always chalked those up to small-town superstition. That night, I felt it before I heard it. As my headlights reached the base of the overpass, the familiar weight of unease settled over me. The air changed. It grew stale and cold despite the warm spring evening. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, racing against the instinct to flee the spot. Then, faint at first, a sound reached me. A scream. It was raw and shattered, like a soul in agony splitting the night. Not the scream of anger or fear, but something worse. Deep, guttural, primal, and utterly desperate. The kind of scream that claws its way out of the abyss with every ounce of torment inside. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car came to a halt just before the underpass. I stared into the shadows beneath the bridge, where the scream echoed again, louder, resonating against the concrete pillars that held the highway above. The sound bounced in endless loops, like it was trapped in some awful cycle repeating through time. For a long moment, I sat frozen, trying to convince myself it was nothing. A poor prank, drunk kids somewhere, the wind playing tricks in the hollows below. But the scream came again, this time closer, more urgent, tearing at my guts. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My curiosity began to edge out the fear. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for the door handle, thinking maybe I could get a better look at the source of the sound. But the instant I touched the handle, the scream stopped dead. A suffocating silence rushed in, thick and absolute. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, and in that stillness, I thought I heard faint whispers, low and unintelligible at first, like 1,000 voices murmuring behind the walls, brushing against my consciousness like silk strands of shadow. I threw the door lock back in frustration and slammed the door shut. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure the sound filled the space beneath the overpass. I forced myself to breathe, slow and controlled. But then the whispers grew clearer, soft words drifting through the stale air, so thin I could barely catch them. They spoke of pain, regret, and endless waiting. Every now and then, I caught bits. A name, a plea, something like, "Help us," and "Don't stay." The voices were harsh but fading, distant and desperate. like echoes of something terrible buried too deep for memory. My skin prickled with cold sweat. The feeling was electric, almost alive, like the overpass itself breathed and watched me from some unseen eye. I turned the radio on, hoping to drown out the voices, but it only crackled with static and a warped version of an old folk song, sung slow and mournful, shifting with the breeze. The song's eerie melody wrapped around me, mismatched and hauntingly familiar. Without warning, the temperature dropped so suddenly, I could see my breath fog the inside of the car. I reached for the heater. Nothing but cold air gusted through the vents. Suddenly, a fresh scream exploded from beneath the bridge. Louder than before, sharper, more anguished. It surged into my ears like a shock wave, and I instinctively slammed the car into gear, tires fighting the gravel as I sped away. Yet the screams followed me. Every mile I drove, they lingered over the shoulder, trailing and echoing in my mind. I glimpsed shadows flickering just beyond the reach of my headlights, forms twisting and bending impossibly, their shapes like smoke captured in moonlight. I told myself it was exhaustion, nerves fraying in the late hours. But no explanation could quiet the terror that settled deep in my bones. Days later, I went back with a small group of friends who were skeptical about the story. I wanted to prove to them myself if the overpass was just in my head or if something truly lurked there. But what they heard was different. Laughter. A high, chilling cackle that bounced beneath the bridge like the sound of broken glass. Others heard whispers too, soft and pleading, and a few caught the distant sobbing of children. Some said they felt weight pressing down on their chests, like invisible hands squeezing tight. We all tried to record it, phones, whatever we could. But every device died at the spot. Screens went black, recordings only captured static, and our calls for help fizzled into silence. We left shaken, scarred by the notion that some place can bleed fear so thick it infects everything around it. Since that night, I avoid that highway after dark. But sometimes, when I drive alone and the shadows grow long, I swear I feel eyes watching, waiting, and the distant scream curling in the air like a curse. It's a reminder that some echoes never fade, some screams never end, and some shadows beneath the overpass are waiting for their next visitor. I used to think that the open road was a place of freedom, the kind of limitless stretch where you could escape your problems, lose yourself in the endless miles and the hum of your engine. But that all changed one night during a trip I'll never forget. It was the night a car began following me, and no matter what I did, it wouldn't leave. Not until I was pushed to the edge of my sanity. I was driving solo, crossing the country from Chicago to Denver for work. The trip was long but manageable, mostly highway driving through quiet plains and empty stretches where the only light came from stars and the glow of distant towns. The sun was setting when I filled up at a small gas station in Nebraska. I was tired, sure, but feeling confident. My rig was steady and solid, and the roads ahead were open. I pulled out of the gas station and merged onto the interstate. Slowly, the darkness settled in like a curtain, swallowing the fields that stretched like ocean waves on either side of the highway. I flicked on the radio, the low crackle soothing my nerves as I settled in for the long haul. But as the miles stretched between me and my last stop, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. Headlights. Headlights that stayed directly behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. People drive late at night. Cars follow each other all the time. But as time passed, my suspicion grew. The headlights stayed close, too close. I sped up. They matched my pace. I slowed. They didn't fall behind. I checked the rear view again and again. It was the same car, a dark sedan, unmarked, windows tinted so heavily I couldn't see inside. But who was driving? Were they watching me? I felt a cold, creeping dread settle deeper in my stomach. A knot tightened in my chest. I tried to shake the feeling, told myself it was coincidence. Maybe the driver was just going my way. But something about the way those lights seemed to lock onto me like a predator to prey sent chills crawling down my spine. I plotted a quick stop at the nearest rest area. Pulling off, I watched carefully. The car followed me, pulled in behind me. But when I got out, it stayed inside the vehicle. Engine off, headlights on. Nothing moved, no one came out. What the hell was going on? I stayed inside my car, heart thundering, watching that black sedan as minutes stretched. Its owner was invisible, and silence hung thick between us. After what felt like hours, I decided to leave. I started my engine and merged back onto the highway, glancing nervously in the mirror. And there it was, the headlights, steady and unblinking, following. I tried everything after that. I took sudden exits, speeding up, slowing down, weaving lanes. Nothing shook the car. It mirrored every move with unnerving precision. It was like a reflection of my own fear, permanently etched to my every turn. Desperation mounted. The loneliness of the night stretched out around me, thick with silence and shadows. My radio crackled, mechanical noise filling the void. But the only thing I felt sure about was that I was trapped on this road with a car that didn't want me to leave. Hours passed, the sky turning to ink above and the road extending endlessly beneath. At one point, I recognized this stretch of highway. Dry grass blowing on either side, no houses or signs for miles. I'm exhausted, trembling with tension, sweat beading on my forehead. I'm terrified, but I can't stop. I remember the sudden urge to pull off deep into a deserted parking lot, heart pounding, breath shallow. I shut the car down and prayed the car would pass me by. It didn't. It rolled into the lot behind me, engine silent, windows dark. I waited. No footsteps. No voices. No engine roar. Then, it just vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, disappeared like smoke. Relief rushed through me, but it was hollow. The fear didn't leave. It sat with me, lurking in the shadows of lonely highways and deserted rest stops, lurking in every mirror glance. When I finally reached Denver, exhausted and raw, I hoped the nightmare was over. It wasn't. In the weeks that followed, I saw that car. Not once or twice, but many times. Always in the distance, parked across the street from my apartment, idling at stoplights, waiting. The car was always there. No one else seemed to see it. The parking attendants shrugged. Neighbors said they never noticed anything unusual. I stared at its black form, windows dark as a void. Headlights never on in the daylight. I found myself checking every reflection, my nerves frayed to a wire. I felt followed, not just on the road anymore, but everywhere. Finally, the night it showed up behind me in my own driveway, the terror submerged me completely. Parked just a few feet away, its engine buzzing quietly, the inside hidden in shadow, as if the driver waited for me in silence. I never touched the doors. I never tried to look inside again. I quit long drives, took jobs closer to home, changed up my routines. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind is low and the streets are empty, I hear the faint hiss of an engine. Too soft to be real, but too familiar to ignore. I look out and glimpse a shape in the shadows, watching. I don't know what that car was. I don't know who or what drove it. All I know is some things don't follow you just to pass the time. They follow you because they've chosen you. Because the road never really lets you go. I have driven countless miles on lonely highways, stopping at roadside rest areas more times than I can count. Usually, these are quick breaks. Stretch the legs, grab a bite or use the restroom, and then back on the road. But one night, a simple stop became an experience I'll never forget. A terror so real, it burned itself into my memory. And the kind of fear that feels like it haunts you long after the nightmare ends. It was a mid-October evening in West Texas. I was on the road past midnight, navigating an endless stretch of open highway with nothing but the moon and stars for company. I had been driving for nearly 10 hours, fatigue crawling into my bones with every mile. The desolate night around me was so quiet, it felt like the world was holding its breath. When I saw the small sign for a rest area, I almost cried out of relief. I pulled off the highway and parked near the small single-story restroom building that stood eerily alone against the vast darkness. The parking lot was empty. No other cars, no sounds except the faint rustling of dry brush in the wind. I stepped out and took a deep breath of the cool night air. The building's fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I walked toward the door marked Men. The door squeaked faintly as I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Stale disinfectant mixed with a faint, underlying scent of mold and something metallic, like blood or rust. The restroom was small, one hallway lined with a row of stalls on one side and sinks on the other. I hurried to an empty stall at the end, shut and locked the door behind me, and sat down with a great sense of relief. I thought I'd be safe here for a few moments, but that relief was shattered in an instant. With a sharp bang, the stall door slammed behind me. At first, I thought the breeze had knocked it closed, but the handle no longer turned. The door was locked tight from the outside. Impossible to open from my position. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed the handle and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began gnawing at me. I called out, my voice cracking, "Hello? Someone, please. This door is locked." No answer. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just the distant hum of the flickering fluorescent light overhead. I began to pound on the door with my fists, louder and harder, desperate for help. My breath came in uneven gasps, cold sweat beading on my forehead. Nothing. Then, something else. A faint scratching sound. Slow at first, like nails scraping lightly over wood or metal. It came from the other side of the door. I pressed my ear to its cold surface, trying to hear. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate. It traced patterns along the frame, lines, circles, symbols I couldn't understand. My hands trembled as I clawed at the door, trying to resist the rising terror. Then I heard whispers. Soft, barely audible. Words that twisted in the air, impossible to catch fully. They sounded like my name, faint but clear. "Help! Stay! You can't leave!" I sank to the cold tile floor, heart pounding wildly, breath shaking. More scratching filled the small space, followed by soft tapping, like fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on the door. I tried calling for help again, screaming with what little voice I had left. But the silence swallowed everything. Minutes stretched into endless time. I felt as though the walls were closing in on me. The flickering overhead light buzzed erratically, shadows dancing and twisting on the cracked tiles. Suddenly, the ventilation vents above me began to rattle. And through them came a low hum. An eerie lullaby, sung in a language I couldn't understand, but felt deep in my bones. The air grew colder. My breath released in icy clouds before me. The whispers returned, layering in multiple voices, swirling around my head like a haunted chorus. Don't leave. Forever. Let us in. A sudden scraping from the corner of the stall made me snap my gaze to the shadowed cracks where the wall met the floor. For a terrifying second, I thought I saw a dark shape, a twisted, formless shadow reaching out toward me, distorted and writhing. Frozen with fear, I couldn't move or scream. The air thickened, compressing around me like an invisible cage. Time fractured. I don't know how long I was trapped there. Sometimes I screamed, sometimes I pleaded. Sometimes I sat in the crushing silence, listening to the world just outside the steel door. So close, yet completely unreachable. At one point, a burst of cold swept through the stall, and the door suddenly jingled, the lock clicking as if a hand turned the key. I stumbled forward and yanked the door open. Blinding fluorescent light flooded in. No one. No one was there. I ran out of the restroom, flushed by relief and terror in equal measure. The parking lot was still empty and silent. I jumped into my car and locked the doors, my hands trembling on the wheel. I never looked back. Driving away, my mind swirled with confusion and fear. Was it exhaustion? A hallucination? Some inexplicable horror playing tricks on a tired mind? But I knew what I felt was real. The crushing panic, the cold presence, the voices that lingered long after sound had stopped. That night changed me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched or followed. The whispers followed me home, echoing in the quiet moments before sleep. Weeks later, I tried to share what happened with friends. Most brushed it off, offering explanations of stress, dehydration, or urban legends feeding my anxiety. But how do you explain a locked door that won't open? The scratching on the walls of a simple restroom stall? The unrelenting whispers calling your name in the dead of night? Sometimes I catch a faint noise on quiet nights, a gentle tapping on my window, or a shadow gliding just outside my peripheral vision. And when my mind is tired or the night is long, I swear I hear those whispers again. Soft, urgent, haunting. I never stopped at a roadside restroom alone again, because some doors aren't meant to open. And some rest stops hold visitors they never want to let go. I never thought I would be the kind of person to stop for a stray on a dark highway. It's just not something I've ever done before. Too many warnings, too much caution bred into me about the dangers of the road at night. But that night, something was different. Something about that dog caught my attention in a way that felt impossible to ignore. And I wish I had. I was driving alone through rural Texas, somewhere between Odessa and Midland. The time was just past midnight, and the roads were empty stretches of cracked asphalt spliced between endless yards of flat, scrubby desert. The sky above was a deep sheet of stars, barely interrupted by the distant glow of towns too far away to reach quickly. My body was tired, eyes heavy, but I was pushing through the weariness, determined to hit my next stop before the sun came up. Then, by the side of the road, I saw it. Sitting motionless on the dirt shoulder was a dog, or at least what looked like a dog. Its coat was rough and matted with dust, patches of fur missing. Its ribs were visible beneath a thin layer of skin, and it had a limp that made my chest tighten with sudden concern. But what really stuck was its eyes, dark, deep, and strangely intelligent. As if the dog was watching me, waiting for something. I slowed and pulled off the shoulder, heart pounding, not out of fear at first, but out of this irrational need to help. I had some water and jerky in my car from a previous stop, and an impulse told me to try and rescue this creature from the harsh night. I stepped out cautiously and called softly, "Hey, buddy, you okay?" It didn't respond beyond a slow blink, just sat watching, unmoving, like it knew I was there but had decided not to react. I tossed some jerky near it. The dog sniffed but didn't eat, staying still with an almost eerie calm. I wanted to help, but as I reached for the leash I kept in my trunk, a sudden chill ran up my spine, and I hesitated. Without warning, the dog turned and disappeared into the night. But instead of running away like a wild animal, it slipped away silently, moving like a shadow dissolving into darkness. I stood frozen, watching the empty road, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. I got back in my car and tried to shake it off, ready to keep driving. But within 20 miles, the dog was back. Same place, same posture, same injured limp, sitting just at the edge of the dusty road, as if waiting for me. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over again, heart pounding wildly this time. "Why are you following me?" I whispered harshly, unsure if I was talking to the dog or myself. I stepped out with a shaky breath, calling softly, but the dog only stared back with those haunting eyes. Its wounds looked worse now, a deep gash on its shoulder bleeding dark, dried blood. I wanted to help, but a cold numbness had spread through me. It wasn't just an animal. Something about it felt wrong. That night, I kept seeing the dog again and again, always at the roadside, blurred in my headlights or in the corner of my eye. Once, as I slowed near a particularly deserted crossroad, it stepped into the road and stopped in front of my car. I slammed the brakes just in time. The dog didn't move. It looked straight at me for way too long, too knowing, too alive. Then it howled, a long, eerie sound that was neither animal nor human. It echoed across the empty plains like a warning or a call. I sat frozen in the car, heart thudding, watching as the dog slowly melted away into the night. The next morning, I stopped in Amarillo, hoping to find an animal shelter or a vet. But I couldn't find any reports of a stray matching the description. No dogs reported missing, no calls for help. The image haunted me. The wounded dog, those deep eyes watching, the strange howl drifting on the wind. I tried to tell friends. They laughed it off, a tired mind seeing things. But the memory never left me. Even now, weeks later, I hear that howl in the distance sometimes, especially on quiet nights. I see flickers of the dog's shadow in the edge of my vision, like a trick of the light, but always too vivid to ignore. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone on deserted highways, I swear I feel eyes watching, the dog waiting at the side of the road, limping but relentless. I don't know what it was, whether it was a stray, a ghost, or something else entirely. But I know it followed me for a reason, and I am terrified to find out what that reason was. It was late September on a road trip that should have been routine. Just me and the open highway stretching ahead for hundreds of miles in Nevada's vast desert. I was running low on gas, and the sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving only the stars and the distant flicker of roadside signs to keep me company. Tiredness was creeping in, and my eyes kept drifting closed for seconds, just long enough to scare me awake. That's when I saw it. A gas station up ahead, glowing brightly against the cold desert night like an oasis. The sign said "Open 24 hours," flickering with neon letters in pale blues and reds, casting a soft glow on the cracked pavement. Relief washed over me. Fuel. Coffee, somewhere to rest for a while. I slowed and turned off the highway, the tires crunching on gravel as I pulled into the lot. The building was small but welcoming. Bright, fluorescent lights buzzed from strings above the pumps, tall windows glowing warmly despite the late hour. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door into the convenience store. Inside, it was nearly empty, just a small counter with a woman behind it, who greeted me with a polite smile. I felt happy, almost safe, far from the wilderness. I filled my car's tank, walked around the store, picking up a bottle of water and a candy bar, paid at the register, and stepped back out. It was quiet now, though the lights stayed steady and warm. I lingered, staring into the distance, savoring the moment away from the road. Then I noticed something strange. The desert beyond the station looked different. The air shimmered faintly, like heat waves reflecting off a mirage. But the temperature was cool, and the stars overhead seemed oddly dimmed. Frowning, I looked back toward the gas station. The building's exterior had changed subtly. Where the paint had been faded before, now it was fresh and bright, as if newly painted. The neon sign pulsed erratically, skipping letters as though struggling to stay alive. Curious and a little unsettled, I approached the pump to finish filling my tank. That's when I noticed the cracks. My hands brushed over the surface, and the shell of the station felt weirdly hollow underneath my fingers. A cold breeze whispered past me, carrying a faint scent, part gasoline, part something acrid and burnt. I hurried back to my car, slamming the door shut. The radio popped and crackled feebly, but no music came through. My cell phone had lost all signal, the screen dark as I pulled it out, hoping for a last-minute connection. I turned to get back on the highway, but stopped cold. Where the gas station had been, vanished. Gone. No building, no lights, no pavement. Only cracked desert floor, rocks, and the vast emptiness stretching under a sky I suddenly noticed had grown darker and starless, swallowed in an unnatural void. My breath caught. I blinked, stepped out of the car, and stared, heart pounding. The road, the pumps, the store, all were gone, as if swallowed by the desert itself. I got back inside the car, locked the doors, and stared at the empty patch where respite had been moments before. I tried restarting the engine, turning the key over and over, but the ignition clicked like a dead thing. The world outside my windows was too quiet, too still. I checked my rearview mirror. At first, there was nothing. Then, barely visible, I saw a faint light flicker, like a gas pump handle resting in the air, glowing dimly. Panic rose. The shadows pressed toward the car windows, bending the light like smoke around the frame. I felt frozen in a nightmare. I slammed the door tight and twisted the key again. This time the engine roared to life, breaking the spell. Tires spinning, I peeled out and sped back toward the highway. Ahead, the road stretched empty, the distant winds whistling in a mournful chorus that echoed deep in my chest. But from the trip back, something stayed with me, haunting me still. When I touched my pocket, my fingers closed around a small, folded receipt, the gasoline purchase I never made. Crisp, yellowed paper, warm as if it held the heat of the phantom station. I tried burning it later, but the receipt just curled and blackened, refusing to ignite fully, as if the fire feared what it contained. That night, at a gas station weeks later, I swore I felt the same phantom pump handle pressing lightly against my palm. When I blinked, it was gone, and the lot was just ordinary. A place where real cars and real people came and went. Still, the memory lingers. Sometimes, when driving a long stretch alone in the dark, I can swear that the empty desert blinks back, lighting up briefly in blue and red neon, and the feeling of that phantom gas pump handle rests heavy in my hand. Cold, real, and impossible to shake. I don't know what the station was, a trick of the desert heat, a mirage from some hidden nightmare, or something else entirely. But one thing I do know. The road sometimes offers salvation, and sometimes it's a trap, waiting quietly in the desert night to claim the next traveler.